So in this video, I'd like to show you a little bit about some sketch tools, primarily the trim and extend tool. So let's do this. Let's pretend we're building this part, and it's very similar to your outlet part that I had you model in class. So it's not going to have all the elements of the outlet part, but we're going to go ahead and use our favorite hinge plate in order to demonstrate this. So we're going to go ahead and click on the surface, and we're going to go ahead and open that surface for sketching. So what you want to do is you click on the surface as opposed to the primary planes that we have in here. Now that we have an object in here, we can go ahead and use some of the surfaces associated with that object. So if we click on that, go to the Sketch tab, and if we go to, we're going to go ahead and sketch out some elements in there. We're going to go ahead and sketch out a circle. But first, we're going to put in some center lines to kind of provide some symmetry. So let's go to center line. And before we move further, let's go ahead and go to our view orientation. And let's go normal to the screen so we can see what we're looking at. What we like to do is we like to extend a line from the midpoint on that top edge down to the midpoint down here, just like we did in the symmetry video. So take a look at that, and I'll give you some insight as to what we're doing. So two center lines in here, and we know these center lines are fully defined. They're black. They're fully defined, which means they can't move. That's what fully defined means. So when a sketch is fully defined, it won't have that minus sign on it. So if we were to rebuild this, for instance, that minus sign disappears, so sketch 2 is good. Now if you're in the middle of something like this, you accidentally close out a sketch, but you still see it in the background because there's no feature associated with it. The way you get back to that is you just right click on that sketch in the in the feature manager and tell it to edit sketch. So here's our sketch back. And what we want to do is we want to draw a couple circles on the top and the bottom. So if we just sketch a circle out like that, and it's blue and it has a lot of flexibility here, we can move it around, we can stretch it, make it bigger, make it smaller. It can go up, it can go down, it goes sideways. It doesn't have a lot of definition to it, but we're going to constrain that a little bit. So we're going to go ahead and put a dimension on that. We're going to make that maybe 0.75 inches. And now what we really want to do is we want to center that circle. That's part of this, is we want to be able to center that circle. And we're going to center that either on this line or that line. But if you drag it to this line, we're going to make it kind of a vertically centered. We're going to go ahead and drag it on that line and drop it into place. So you can see right next to the cursor, it's going to have a yellow preview of the coincident relationship. That's about ready to go. So we drop that into place. The yellow preview becomes a green sketch relation that we're ready to go with. Green or blue, depending on your version. So let's go ahead and put a dimension on this again. We're going to put a dimension from the top to the bottom. We're going to make that about 1 inch. And now what we want to do is we want to go ahead and mirror that circle down to the bottom. But let's do some additional elements in here too. In fact, let's change this a little bit. Let's take that 1 inch and delete that. Now let's go ahead and dimension that to the center line circle, because I don't think I showed you this in the symmetry video. But if we were to take that circle and dimension it to this line, we'll see 1 inch there too, because it's right in the middle of that 4-inch part. But if we take that dimension and put it on the bottom down here, now it's implying that we're going to put in another feature in down here, perhaps a symmetrical feature. I did point that out, but I just wanted to do that one more time. So we're going to make that too, drop that into place. Again, it goes black. If we go to the green check mark, just choose a setting that was on that before. So now we're going to put some additional geometry in here. Instead of making that 3/4 of an inch, let's go ahead and make that 1. Again, if we double click on the number of that dimension, we can go ahead and type in a different value in there and then press enter to get that closed. And now we're going to put some lines in there. We're going to put a line from that portion of the circle horizontal to this portion of the circle. So you can see that we're going to have a coincident relationship over here on the left-hand side, coincident relationship on the right-hand side, and it's going to be horizontal too at the same time. So let's put a dimension in that. We can either dimension it from the center of the circle if we want to do that, make that a specific distance, or we can provide a dimension on the length of that line itself. But we're going to make this about 0.3 inches. So now we have it from the center. And what we want to do is we want to go ahead and mirror this down to the, down over here, perhaps, or just have another line that would be symmetrical down at the bottom. So we're going to exaggerate this a little bit and just kind of sketch that out. So this line has got a lot of flexibility, just like the line up top. It's got two coincident relationships to it, but it doesn't have a length to it, nor is it defined by another dimension to the center of the circle. What we can do to maintain the symmetry through the middle of that circle without putting a center line in there is click on this line and this line. And if we just wait a moment, we'll see a shortcut menu come up over here next to the mouse. We're going to make those equal to each other. So it's very efficient. Sketching, this is very efficient. If I were to click off to the side over here, you can turn green because I selected that surface in here. But it's very efficient in the fact that with just 3 dimensions in here, we're able to define that circle and there's 2 lines in that circle. So here's where the trim tool comes in. If you go up to your sketch tab in your command manager, go to trim entities. We have a couple different choices in here. We're going to cover the rest of these later, but right now we just have trim, and we can do power trim. And what that does is it allows you, if you were to take your cursor over here and sketch out over here, stuff over here, you can see it actually makes a trace. And anytime your cursor touches something, it's going to disappear. It's going to disappear between 2 other sketch entities. So if I were to touch this line over here, it's going to disappear between that point and that line. So let's try that one more time. Power trim. Let's go ahead and make that trace. Bang, we're going to hit that. We don't want to necessarily hit our center line because we don't want to erase it. So we're going to have to take our cursor and unclick it and go onto this side and then press it again. And when you have that pressed, the left mouse button pressed, you can see it making that trace. We're going to go ahead and trim that out here too. Now you notice the SolidWorks now is making this kind of a darker color. That means you have 2 elements in here that can be extruded or extrude cut, or some other feature could be created from that. But let's go ahead and finish trimming this out. We're going to trim that out, and we're going to trim this out, and now we have a sketch in here that we'd actually do something symmetrical with. And what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and mirror that to the south. We're going to mirror that down here. So once that's created, escape a couple times, takes us out of that trim command. We're going to go ahead and grab that sketch. With the control key to press, grab that line as I demonstrated in the symmetric video, and we're going to mirror those entities down to the bottom. And these are all symmetric relationships. All the symmetric relationships associated with this are also in the center over here to that center line, and are also up here. So the symmetric relationship that we put in here, mirroring those items in here, actually creates kind of a lot of clutter in your model. But recognize what these symbols are, and what you do, you'll understand why they're there. Okay, so let's look at another sketch tool. This one is related to the Trim Entities tool, sketch tool. If you go to the pull-down arrow, it's called Extend Entities as opposed to Trim Entities. Difference between these two is it's going to take a line and actually add stuff to it rather than take it away. It's not going to give you a trace either, so what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to click on a sketch element, an arc or a line, and extend that. Before we do that, let's go to center line up here. Now let's sketch a center line from that top edge to this bottom edge down here. We're going to make that a 1/2 inch distance between the edge and that line. And the reason why we're doing this is we're giving ourselves some reference geometry in here so we'd actually extend a line to it. So let's do this. Let's go to the Extend Entities. And if you were to click on a couple different elements in here, if we were to click on this arc over here, you can see it's going to extend it off to that line up there. And that's okay. And if we continue to click on it, it's going to continue doing that. One thing you'll notice about that line is that line now all of a sudden became kind of thin, because what we have in here is we have 2 co-radial arcs in here. Line or arc, I think I called it line before, but it's really an arc. We have 2 co-radial arcs in here that are conflicting with each other. One is the primary one when it was sketched first, and then the other one's kind of a little bit thinner line type, and it's sitting in the background. It's okay, but it's not very elegant sometimes to have 2 co-radial arcs that have a common endpoint here. So let's do escape a couple times and do Control Z. Will take us back to what we had before. Now let's look at another application of this. Instead of extending arcs, we can extend lines. So again, go up to Trim Entities, Extend Entities, and we can click on that line and it extends it out to this line over here. If we do the one in the bottom, it's going to say this sketch segment being trimmed has a midpoint or equal relationship or equidistant relation. Trimming a segment will delete the relation. Do you want to continue? And the answer is going to be yes. So what we have in here is we're making that line equal to that line. If we extend that line over, they can't possibly be equal. So SolidWorks is not going to make this line the same length as this line. It's just going to break that relationship. So watch that equal relationship, sketch relation. It's going to disappear. And extend the line over here too. So now the line is not fully defined, but it does extend it to that center line that we have over there. I think it'll get fully defined if you were to click on that line and that point in there, select them both, Let's try that again. The point and that line, we're going to make a coincident relationship. And if we actually made that line the same distance up here with that dimension in here, it would make it fully defined too. But we're not going to go through that effort. Again, back to extend entities, we could do the same thing on the top up here too. It maintains that dimension that we had before, so that remains black. So let's do Control-Z a couple times, get us back to the original view that we had. There's one more object we could use, and that's Trim Entities tool, sketch tool. We could actually use this to extend too. So we could take the Trim Entities and click on that line and then drag that line out. We could drag it out all the way over to this line over here. And when we do that, it creates a coincident relationship to it, and that actually you might find that a little bit more convenient than actually using the extend entities. The extend entities might be okay if you have a bunch of lines you need to extend to another reference, because you could just click on those lines one right after another, save just some mouse clicks. Whereas this one, you have to click on the line, drag it out, and actually plant it on that other line over here, which, you know, depending on your situation, one might be a little bit more convenient than the other. So another way of doing that, just one last thing, if you take your trim entity and take this line and extend it out, but just kind of like park it out there in the middle of nowhere, you can finish that by taking that line, that endpoint of that line, and picking up that coincident relationship with this line over here. So that's one way of doing it. And then back to trim entities, if we want to trim that out, if we want to trim this over, you notice that the endpoint of that line is blue, so we can take that blue endpoint. It's constrained by this dimension over here, but we can still take that blue endpoint, drag that off to that line, and pick up that coincident relationship. So a couple different ways of doing this. Trim entities not only will trim by using a tracer that you have in here. When your cursor touches a line, it's going to trim it out between two sketch entities. You could also use it to extend a line and pick up a reference like for this line over here if you want to do that. And the extend entities has got its place in here too. If you want to use extend entities, you're clicking on a bunch of different lines in your model, and you want to extend them all at one time. It's just one click per line. You can just go right down the list there, and it'll extend those entities. So that's the trim entities and the extend entities sketch tool.